Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Bruger, and for this presentation, I'll be going over the topic of prosopagnosia, also known as facial blindness. I'll be discussing what it is and also why it needs to have more importance and publicity in modern society. But before getting into the presentation itself, I'd love to start with a simple question. If you were to wake up tomorrow morning and not be able to recognize your family, your friends, coworkers, peers, professors, whatever it may be, what would some of the emotions be that you would have? What are some of the thoughts you would have, right? For me personally, if this were to happen to me, I assume that I would have immense fear. I would have a lot of anxiety of not being able to know those around me. I would have extreme sadness, right? That I don't have that stability and security of having identifiable relationships, right? And I assume that the majority of you would have those same feelings, right? Of uncertainty, of the unknown, right? And the reality is that is not hypothetical, right? It affects roughly 2.3 of the population of the whole world. And this equates to about 184 million people worldwide. And so this is not hypothetical. Millions of these people suffer every single day with anxiety, with fear, with self-isolation, right? Because they don't know the people who are around them. And it severely inhibits their ability to form relationships and friendships. And prosopagnosia is a diagnosis that affects so many people, yet is rarely publicized, right? I didn't know what it was before taking a psych class. And that is a huge issue, right? Because the feelings that these people have are immense, are very severe, and it is not uncommon, right? It affects 2.3% of the world's population. And prosopagnosia has two forms. It's either developmental or acquired. Developmental prosopagnosia is onset through simple genetics. It could be hereditary depending on your family, or it could be a simple mutation that happens at birth. And the other side of it is acquired. This could either happen on brain-inducing trauma, right? Or other diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia that really reduce that ability to recognize both objects and people around you. And although this seems like an invisible condition that's very rare, it is actually more common than people assume it to be. And of course, like the feelings and thoughts that you feel like you would have if this happened to you is very prevalent in the people that actually do have this condition. They're more likely to have depression, anxiety, habits of self-isolation and shame of their condition, and fear of what their futures might be. Now, this is a huge problem for both sides of those who have prosopagnosia, both developmental and acquired. But if you think about it, these habits and these feelings in children who have the condition is a very scary thought, right? A child who's roughly 7 years old, for example, who has such great anxiety about being in social situations, fear of not being able to recognize their parents, right? Their siblings in a group event, that is a feeling that doesn't go away. Yet rather it's one that grows throughout their life through teenage years, through adulthood, right? If there's not a treatment that's put into place, then these symptoms and these habits and feelings just grow within the people. And that is a scary thought, right? To know that there's so many people around us who are suffering so greatly with this fear and honestly anxiety of what their future could be. Now, there are different methods that currently exist of testing people who believe that they might have prosopagnosia. These are considered like the FFT, the facial face test, CFMT, which is the Cambridge facial memory test, and BFRT, which is the Benton facial recognition test. And all of these are very similar in the fact that they provide the individual with images and link that to their ability to remember them, right? And as you would imagine, this is not exactly the same as it would be in real life, right? In a physical and tangible interaction, right? Because when you're given these pictures, it's more of a static method of testing, right? They're not able to see how their mouth moves if they have a lisp or how they walk, right? Which is a major factor for people with prosopagnosia for identification. And so, what comes with these forms of testing is often either misdiagnoses or not a diagnosis at all, right? Depending on how they grade you on those exams. And for many of the people with prosopagnosia, it comes with an acquired skill of identifying people, right? Without remembering who they are. This can either be through how they walk or their gait, right? If they have a limp or something that's more identifiable, right? That's a huge indicator of who that person might be. Another one will be hairstyle, right? If they're blonde, if they have red hair, black hair, curly hair, short or long, right? That's a huge indicator. Another one is more physical identifiers through their body, right? If they have tattoos, if they're tall, short, if they have a beard, right? That is going to make someone stand out in a crowd. And the last one is through conversation, right? Or their voice. If they have a deep voice, a lisp per se, or other identifiers through conversation. And as you can imagine, if you don't remember anybody that you're surrounded with and you have to rely on these different methods of coping, that is assumably a very exhaustive and strenuous way to live, right? Having to recognize someone through how you think that they talk, or identifying someone through the shape or color of their hair. That is a process that takes a lot of mental power, right? And it is not easy to do on the day-to-day basis. And so that is why researchers have tried to find ways of reducing these negative impacts of prosopagnosia. One of them, one of the more prevalent options, is the inhalation of oxytocin. And there has been a lot of research done recently considering oxytocin and social habits, oxytocin and relationship bonding, right, or building. There's been a lot done to see how this affects someone socially. And more recently, as of a decade ago, this has been introduced in the field of prosopagnosia. And actually, the results have shown a very positive interaction between oxytocin and the increased ability to recognize somebody's face for those with prosopagnosia. The sad thing is that this study was done about a decade ago. And after that, the research sort of got put on hold, right? Because this condition isn't considered a highly debilitating one or one with much prevalence among others, right? And that has been a huge theme throughout the field of psychology and through different patterns with research, is that they find something and then it stops after the study. And that is something that we really need to change as a society because this condition is not one that needs to be taken lightly, right? It affects millions and millions of people and will only continue to grow worse, get more exhaustive, right? Without more developed and confirming treatments, right? And so that is how it applies to us, right? We need to educate ourselves more on the condition. We need to act as advocates for these people who are trying their best to fit in and adjust and cope with a condition that they're likely never to get resolved. And so that leads to the end. If you have any questions or concerns about prosopagnosia, please reach out to me, and I would love to help you because this is a condition that needs more social awareness. It needs more action and education on our part. So thank you for coming. And yeah.